direct Mr. Swalwell to the elements of bribery. Whoever, being a public official, corruptly demands or seeks personally anything of value in return for being influenced in the performance of an official act. The Department of Justice's Criminal Division Public Integrity Section opined in September that something as nebulous as an investigation is not of sufficient concrete value to constitute something of value under this statute. They also, the other element that is at question here, and one of the reasons I think that we need more than 1 week as the Committee of Jurisdiction to look into this matter, is because if there are crimes, we should be bringing experts, we should be bringing in testimony, and if there is a crime, I think it is far more fair to charge pass articles of impeachment on a president where the president can defend against specific elements as opposed to something as vague as abuse of power. Mr. Swalwell, the official act that you talk about under the McConnell, Supreme Court's McConnell decision, that decision says, setting up a meeting, talking to another official, or organizing an event without more does not fit the definition of official act. There are 2 elements missing in your analysis, but that doesn't surprise me because there were no elements that were that the special counsel found in this situation. I think that it is unfortunate when the gentleman from Rhode Island talks about the president sending Mr. Giuliani to the Ukraine to smear Vice President Biden. Let's talk about what Vice President Biden did. His son sat on a board and made an outrageous amount of money for someone that had no background in energy, no background in the Ukraine, while his father was the vice president. If that is not a fair topic for discussion in the world of politics, I don't know what is. Smearing is trying to conjure up false information or making a vague argument based on false information. This isn't smearing. This is seeking the truth about corruption. Not a single member on the other side of the aisle has been willing to condemn the conduct of the former vice president. How frustrating it must be to be President Trump and have your son spend over $1 million on attorney's fees when the special counsel is investigating something that never happened. There was no collusion. There was no conspiracy between Russia and the Trump campaign. But there is clear evidence of wrongdoing between Hunter Biden, the former Vice President Joe Biden.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I will not. And the Ukraine and the corporation Burisma. So the idea that there is a smear going on, let's look at the facts. And I will yield to my friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about what was going on. In 2017, 2018, aid was given. In 2019, there was a pause put on it. You have a new administration in the Ukraine, and the benchmarks, the anti-corruption benchmarks, were done under the previous administration, Poroshenko. That was testified to in this committee. But what we know is several of the previous corrupt administrators and cabinet-level officials, including some oligarchs, had close relationships to Zelensky. There was a concern whether Mr. Zelensky was the real deal. The aid was prospective, and the pause was unknown. U.S. officials continued to meet with Ukrainian officials, and they determined that Zelensky was the real deal, and so they made every effort to convince President Trump that that was the case. Once 2 new anti-corruption measures were released within 2 days, so was the funding. That's what changed. Yield back.
Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent request
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Just in response to Mr. Buck, a unanimous consent request for a Vox November 15, 2019 article, all of Robert Mueller's indictments, including the 34 people and 3 companies that he indicted in his lengthy investigation.
Without objection.
I object.
The gentleman reserves an objection, wants to see it, that's fair. What purpose does Mr. Reschenthaler seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Without objection. mean,
I yield to my
gentleman's
good
recognized.
friend and colleague from Florida.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I just got to come back to this interview with Yermak because it was like the tree that fell in the forest that nobody heard that completely demolished the entire Democrat case. They have no evidence that the Ukrainians ever knew that this aid was withheld. So they're literally trying to prosecute an impeachment against the president for a shakedown when the alleged people being shook down, one, said they felt no pressure, and two, did not even know it was happening. And so then time and again, you heard them in debate, in press conferences, and the whole circus show that's going on here say, well, we've got this testimony from Gordon Sondland. We all remember Gordon. Gordon Sondland wandering his way to an escalator with this guy who speaks English as a second language, and Gordon says, well, maybe I said something to him about this. Well, I mean, that was the whole deal for them. And then, I mean, you talk about embarrassing. The same day that they introduced their articles of impeachment that we knew they were going to introduce one way or another the moment they took the majority, it comes out that Yermak denies the whole thing. So show me the Ukrainian that was pressured. Show me the Ukrainian that knew that any of this was tied to any conditionality. There's no conditionality in the call, and so it's quite easy to answer Ms. Jayapal, the gentlelady from Washington's question. Very easy. In this case, there is no conditionality. You can't prove it. You have no evidence of it. And frankly, even the Ukrainians, even your purported victims, are coming out in the press and saying their theory of the case is wrong. Their fundamental premise has been rejected. I yield the gentleman from Ohio. Yield back to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yes, I yield to my friend from Ohio.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Exactly. What changed is we got a brand new president who ran, Zelensky ran on anti-corruption. Let's see if he's the real deal. And that's exactly what happened in the 55 days the aid was paused. We talked about 5 critical meetings that took place. 5 meetings. The last one I think is the most important because you had a Democrat senator and a Republican senator meet with President Zelensky in Kyiv. They knew the aid had been paused at that time. Ukrainians knew they'd learned a few days before that, and the issue never came up. Not because President doesn't say, I would like you to do me a favor, though, because I've been through a lot. He doesn't say that. Very clear. I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot. And that is the understatement of the year. Heck yeah, our country's been through a lot. This is the day after Bob Mueller sat in front of this committee, and we learned that there was nothing there. But 2 years he put our country through all kinds of turmoil because of you guys. That's what the president's pointing out, because at the end of this paragraph, he references Bob Mueller. That's what he's talking about. Heck yeah, our country had been through a lot, and the president was pretty ticked about it. He wanted to find out what was going on. That's very legitimate. That is working on behalf of the American people. But again, as I said last night, you guys don't respect the 63 million people who voted for this guy. That's why the Speaker of the House called the president an imposter. That's what's wrong. I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Johnson seek recognition?
Who to strike the last word?
The gentleman's recognized.
I just want to slow this down and be very methodical about it, because most of us here are attorneys, and in this case we're supposed to also be finders of fact, and we're supposed to carefully and objectively analyze the claims against the record. So let's do that. There are 2 articles to this impeachment resolution, of course: abuse of power and obstruction of justice. On the first, Democrats know there is 0 direct evidence in the record of these proceedings to show that President Trump engaged in any scheme of any kind, as is alleged in the resolution, or that he intended in his dealings with Ukraine to influence the 2020 election. No impeachment should ever proceed on the basis of hearsay and conjecture and speculation that wouldn't even be admissible in a local traffic court, and we say that over and over. To my friend Ms. Jayapal, there is simply no evidence of any condition, and I guess I need to repeat the 4 indisputable facts again that are in this record, because repetition apparently is really necessary here. First, both President Trump and Zelensky say there was no pressure exerted. Number 2, the July 25th call transcript shows no conditionality between aid funding and an investigation. Number 3, Ukraine was not aware of the aid, as has been said over and over here, that it was being delayed. And number 4, they never opened an investigation. They still received the aid and they got the meeting. Our colleagues keep misrepresenting the facts. Not only do they misrepresent the do me a favor versus do us a favor, but only 3 of the 17 witnesses called by Chairman Schiff listened in on the call, okay? Only 3 of them. And contrary to the assertions that we've heard this morning, they didn't provide key, uncontrovertible, firsthand testimony of what happened on the call. All 3 of the testimonies contradicted each other. So the 3 people that listened in directly didn't even know. The evidence shows that President Trump holds a deep-seated, genuine, and reasonable skepticism of Ukraine due to its history of pervasive corruption, and his administration sought proof that the newly elected president was a true reformer. Of course, as has been pointed out, the president soon found out that he is a swamp drainer, and that's why the funds were released. President Trump wanted to ensure that the American taxpayer-funded security assistance would not be squandered by what has been reported as the 3rd most corrupt nation in the world before Zelensky. And the discussions they had were never about what will happen in 2020, but rather about what happened in 2016. So the second claim of this resolution is that the president obstructed Congress, but he simply did what virtually every other president in the modern era has also done. What's his big infraction here? He asserted a legitimate executive privilege and legal immunity to question subpoenas issued by various White House officials. There's no evidence of any impeachable conduct with that. It's very commonplace. On every previous occasion of this assertion in the past, the natural impasse that exists between the executive and legislative branches in our constitutional system has been easily and calmly resolved either by a good faith negotiation or a simple filing with the 3rd branch of our government, the judicial branch. We let the courts decide it. In spite of their allegations here, Democrats know President Trump has lawful cause to challenge those subpoenas in this matter. In this case, House Democrats are trying to impeach President Trump simply for seeking judicial review over whether the direct communications between high-ranking advisors and a president under these circumstances are privileged or should be disclosed. That case would be expedited in the courts. It wouldn't take that long. But Democrats said they don't have time for that. Why? Because they promised their base an impeachment by Christmas. This whole thing is so absurd. It should be noted, by the way, that President Trump has consistently cooperated with Congress in fulfilling its oversight and investigation responsibilities here. Over 25 administration officials have testified before Oversight Committee this year, 20 before this committee. At the start of the impeachment inquiry, the White House produced more than 100,000 pages of documents to the Oversight Committee. And of course, he also quickly declassified and produced to everyone the call transcript. Democrats know this is an absurd charge about obstruction, and the truth is, in the history of the republic, there's never been a single-party fraudulent impeachment process deployed against a president like the one that is being used against Donald Trump. They're the ones seeking to nullify our vital constitutional safeguards with this sham. Their ultimate objective is to nullify the votes of the 63 million Americans who voted to elect Donald Trump the president. They violated due process and all the rest. My colleague, Sheila Jackson-Lee, a little while ago, evoked and quoted Barbara Jordan, but she's the one that said during the Watergate inquiry, impeachment not only mandates due process, but due process quadrupled. They have violated that here. They have violated the rules, and everybody in the country can see it. This impeachment's going to fail.